Afternoon, all. Can I get those slides on there, Kieran? So I kind of know what I'm doing. This is my fourth or fifth time speaking here, and this was the first time that I ever spoke in front of a crowd of people 4 years ago. So it's awesome to be back. Just before we get the slides on, be under no illusion, public speaking is really difficult. People that make it look easy, I admire them because it's you get sweaty palms a few minutes before you come and speak to people. So anybody that steps up to do this is got my time of day. Look, while you do that, Kieran, I'll just crack on with the ones here. Oh, good effort. So I've got 15 minutes, which I normally do this presentation in a lot longer, so I'm going to skip over some of the stuff about me because I think John's covered it. I worked for Skyscanner and Capital One and the train line, and now I'm head of cloud security at the Photobox group, which we'll go through. And I kind of created that role. And this presentation's a little bit about how that role came about, why I decided to do it, and if you're on a cloud journey yourself in your organization, some of the things you can think about. Rush through my disclaimers. I like memes. Let's have some fun. It's the afternoon. It's the graveyard shift. I know you're waiting for Edward Snowden. And I'm certainly not an expert. I don't think there's any security experts. So anybody who calls himself an expert, I think, is lying because it's a really, really difficult industry. And I'm certainly none of those things, even though people tend to think otherwise. So I'm really, really going to gloss over this in the interest of time. So that's a bit about my background. The guys from the conference will share the slides after. I do some public speaking, obviously, that's why I'm here. I run one of Scotland's largest tech meetups. If anybody ever wants to come and speak, please find me on LinkedIn. I run an AWS security Slack forum that I'll give links to afterwards. And people always mention that I'm on LinkedIn a lot. I don't really know that's a thing, but apparently I am. Somebody else came up with that term, LinkedIn brain fart. So my journey, I joined Photobox in May last year. And joined as the head of security engineering to look at a whole stack of work in that area. Normally, when you join a company, it's one company, easy peasy. Get to know one set of staff, one set of technologies. I joined 4 companies at once, effectively, when I moved into head of cloud security. So we have 5 brands within the Photobox group. 4 of these brands here are in AWS, and they've been on different journeys into AWS, fully committed to Amazon as a product. And there's complexities around doing that. There's complexities joining one job, let alone trying to cover that across 4 companies. And I think it's worth calling these things out because I think it makes us understand how difficult security is. So these are some of the things that you need to consider when you're in the cloud in one company, let alone in 4. You've got different tech stacks, different programming languages throughout your business. Like that could just be for one company. We've got everything from Perl through to Python and Ruby on Rails and all sorts of other stuff that I'm not an expert at. Different cultures, different maturities. You'll have different business units within your organizations that are at different levels of maturity. Moonpig, for example, they're in a squads and tribes environment, very similar to Skyscanner, very agile, very quick. Photobox has been around a little bit longer and is taking longer to get on that journey. So you have to take all those things into consideration when you're working for these companies. Levels of knowledge, location. So for some of our brands, one of our brands in Spain, one in Germany. There's language barriers. These are all things that as businesses we need to understand and deal with, let alone cloud. I found this picture, which is just some of the kind of applications and things that you can use. It's vast, right? And the last time I talked for this event was around impostor syndrome and around why security is difficult and why impostor syndrome is so prevalent in security. And I think it's because we're expected to know about all this stuff and use all these applications and languages or know something about them. I personally find it very difficult, and I talk openly about that. When you talk about Amazon Web Services, there was an interesting session that I caught the back end of just before coming in here about Dome 9. You can just buy products that will help you. That's one way of trying to fix a problem. Other products are available other than the one from before. But there's complexities of using these things. We're across 4 brands in AWS, so we have a whole load of accounts that we need to manage, from test environments through to prod environments, PCI, and various others. You've got continuous compliance that was talked about in the last session with things like Terraform and CloudFormation for in your pipelines if you are using AWS. Huge amounts of data. Photobox as a company has 9 petabytes of photos in AWS, and we have an obligation to protect that. Bear with me. So my journey really started in AWS in Moonpig. Moonpig transitioned into AWS last year. And I was really the first security person they'd had embedded in that process from the beginning. So sitting in Amazon's offices in well-architected reviews, lots of manual auditing of environments, lots of training, lots of awareness, being in rooms with technical people and decision makers on that journey. It was the first time they'd really had security at that level. A lot of times it's bolted on in organizations. So that was really interesting. It was nothing spectacular from a tooling point of view or maturity point of view. That's where we're getting to now. But that initial just being in the rooms, having those conversations and having an influence over the decisions that are made. Colleague of mine that I brought on the journey is awesome at threat modeling. That had a big influence in how we architected those environments. So when I realized that there was an opportunity to do more with AWS within the company, I created a role and decided to do it, which again, I've got a freedom to do that in this kind of organization that I appreciate is not applicable everywhere. So question, feel free to shout out. What's the most important aspect of securing the cloud? This is an opinion, by the way, so it's not necessarily the whole truth. Anybody want to shout something out? No, nobody brave enough. Yes, that's important, but for me it's people. If you don't have the people to help you do the work, you can't do the work. You can have all the great ideas in the world, but you need people to help you on that journey. I was very lucky, managed to recruit somebody that I worked with at Capital One, technically awesome, and that it's difficult. Recruitment is really hard, but it's the thing that will get you where you need to be. So that's the most important. I think it's the most important part of my job in security. I think anybody. Oh, some mood lighting, just as I talk about that. So what did I do? Complexities of 4 brands to try and cover. Am I standing on something here? Just trying to put me off. So where do you start if you're trying to do this? Just let alone in one business, but across 4. And for me, it was about it's not the sexy stuff, but it was about defining our risk in the cloud. I can get all the tooling I want and get more visibility, but if I don't understand what we're at risk from, I'm going to find it difficult to know what work to do to reduce that risk. It's not the sexiest word in security, risk, unfortunately, but it is what we all align to fundamentally, because that's what we're trying to achieve in our businesses. Now, I think there was a good slide in the last one, actually, on you don't have to do this yourself. There's lots of good standards out there. If you're either moving into the cloud or you're there already, and trust me, your businesses will move into the cloud if they haven't, because it's inevitable. There are things like the CIS benchmarking, which is great for Amazon particularly. NIST, ISACA, Cloud Security Alliance. These things will give you an understanding of how to build some of those frameworks. I took a bit from all of those and some learnings that I've had previously, and I basically built a framework of around 50 vulnerabilities and risks across these 8 areas, specifically in Amazon, because that's what we use. And I've open sourced that, and there's a link at the end of this presentation for you to see it. And I guess what it has done is it's allowed me to see where my focus areas are, whether it's for that one brand or all 4. I can go through these areas and say, where are we at risk? Where are we strong? Where are we not so strong? Where are we missing things? Where can we implement automation or compliance, whatever. It's just given me something to start with, which I didn't have before. And in the true internet style, we then try and open source that to the community if it'll help other people. So you don't have to make this stuff up yourself. It's not plagiarism. So we're heavy Jira users and Photobox. Anybody who follows my boss, Dennis, in the industry will know how passionate he is about automation and Jira. Some people aren't so keen on it, but we love it and we use it a lot. And what we've done is we've defined all of our risks are in Jira. So we have level 1, level 2, level 3 risks. And then we align all our vulnerabilities to our risks. We allocate management and technical owners. These are all tickets within Jira, and we can link those all and graph them and show how what stakeholders are aligned to different parts of the business. And then we link our OKRs. So for those who don't know what OKRs are, they're objectives and key results. Google used to use them. They're projects, essentially, but in a more agile way. And we align those to our vulnerabilities so that we can track which ones we're closing off, and therefore the risks reduce over time, gives us nice visibility of what we're doing. It's all done in Jira, and it's really clever. I wish I could show a little bit more on that, but there's some sensitivities around what's in there. Can you be agile in security? Yes, you can. Sorry, that was the best meme I could find for yes, for those who remember when Harry met Sally. So we work in sprints. We're a 2-person team that works in sprints, which you'd think wouldn't work, but it does. And it allows us to track all the work that we do. So it's not just our OKRs and our project work. We put everything else in there. We put our business as usual, our incidents, training. If I want to do 2 hours of training in a week, I put it into our Kanban board so I can track it and I can show to my bosses that I allocated that time to it. We also use Service Desk for other teams to create work for us. So cloud for me is no different than the rest of security, and I know there's lots of presentations that bleat on about the basics, and we keep saying we don't do it. Well, cloud's no different. We don't do the basics well in cloud either. Well done to anybody in the room who can spot that seminal Leeds Club, Back to Basics, for the old ravers in the room. So these are some of the things that you would need to have a look at addressing if you're either in the cloud or moving to the cloud. MFA, you have root accounts in AWS. One of the best ways to protect them is put multi-factor authentication on those accounts. It should be the best way to protect any account across your business, because I've seen it fix problems, and people still don't do it. IAM is the kind of linchpin of AWS. It's where you allocate all your users, your roles. It's how you give permission to services and people across your estate and across your environments. But people give too much permission to things. They allow people to have too much, and that comes with danger and with risk. So if I was to give any advice onto the things to have a look at addressing within your businesses, if you're in Amazon particularly, and Azure will be the same, and Google, is go and have a look at your access control on all of your accounts. Open S3 buckets, we're still hearing incidents where S3 buckets contain a whole load of personal information and they're just easy to find, and you just click the link and you've got a whole stack of personal information. Why? Amazon make it really difficult now to open S3 buckets to the world, but people are still doing it. You've got to make a conscious decision to say, open me up to the internet, and yet we're still finding them. Logging, if you're in incident response, you've really got to get your logging right in AWS. VPC flow logs, ALB logs, ELB logs. If you don't have that logging, you're not going to be able to retrospectively see what's happened. That's no different than the rest of security. Key rotation and creds. Again, incidents almost every other week these days of credentials being found in GitHub in public repos, which are incredibly dangerous. Amazon will give you a warning if you put an AWS key into a public repo, but it might take you a few hours to deal with that, or days or weeks, depending on the agility of your organization or the visibility of it. Incident response, whether it's within your security teams or in other areas, you need incident responders, because when those incidents happen that I've briefly mentioned, you need somebody to be able to deal with it and respond, and then the improvements off the back of those. So I'm really struggling for time. Cost control, everybody seems to forget about cost control in AWS. They just put everything in AWS, and then they realize why it's 4 times more expensive than their data center. It's because they didn't think about the cost control. Now, you can tailor AWS to be extremely clever about your workloads, but you need to invest the time in doing it. You can't just lift and shift and expect it to suddenly be cheaper. It fundamentally isn't cheaper unless you start tweaking it to be. A shout out to my last company, Capital One. They built Cloud Custodian, open source tool, which anybody is using, because it's an awesome open source tool to be very restrictive about what you can and can't do in AWS, and it allows a lot of alerting and webhooks into Slack and Jira and all the tooling that companies use. So what have I learned in the last 6 months in that crazy whirlwind 10 minutes that I've managed to get through? You've got to start somewhere. The same with building a security team. You don't suddenly just have 20 people. You've got to sort of start somewhere. Changing businesses takes real time and graft, and it's very painful sometimes. You've got to change cultures as well as tech and building teams. It tends to be a long journey. People repeat mistakes. We all do it. We're not very good at learning sometimes. We fail a lot, and that's how human beings are. So we need to find a way to make that better. Cloud, a la the rest of security, is hard. It's complex. Personally, in the last few months, I've had to become more of a sort of network expert, wrong word, than I have before. I've had to understand how to build things in AWS from an environment point of view. And recruitment is absolutely key. If you don't have the right people to do the job, you're going to struggle to get that stuff done. What's helped, other training tools are available. I don't always like mentioning names. A Cloud Guru has been really valuable for me recently. I've been doing some courses on there and getting some certifications. Pluralsight. Cyber is free. That's the free one up there that's got some cool content on it. YouTube, SlideShare. I spend a couple of hours a week probably looking at slides and watching presentations. You need to try and commit the time to it because that's where you learn things. Go and look at people in the industry that are doing a similar job to you. When I started at Skyscanner, I had no idea where to go to get any information because I couldn't find anybody that had done that job before. And luckily I did find a couple of people over in the States and learnt a lot from them from the presentations that they were doing. Want to know more? Again, these slides will be made available. I'll put this out on Twitter, Stu Hirst InfoSec, because I run a security Slack forum which has about 1,000 people. It's got Netflix and Etsy and Capital One and loads of great people on. The information that's shared on that forum is phenomenal. It can be as technical or as high level as you want if you ask questions, and the people there are very, very cool. I also do some very basic open source things where I've put together a list of tools, and then that vulnerability and risk list. If you just go to github.com/Stu Hirst, you'll find it there. It's open source. You can contribute to it. If you think it's crap, then add to it and help out. Quick nod while I've got 30 seconds to the Open Security Summit, which is in June, which is a whole stack of us that get together and do a really collaborative week in Center Parcs. And I don't want to add any more to that because from a time point of view, I'm struggling. Thank you so much. The most whirlwind presentation I've ever done, but I really appreciate you listening. Thank you.